Picture this. A man sits in ashes, literally ashes, the remains of everything he once had. And his skin is covered in sores, and he takes a piece of broken pottery and he scrapes at them. His wife has told him to curse God and die. His friends, well, they're sitting nearby and they've been talking a lot for days now. They want answers. He wants answers. Why is this happening? What did I do? Where is God in this? Is there any justice left in the universe? And the friends have theories. Oh, they've got their theories. You must have sinned, Job. Secret sin, maybe. Hidden pride. Something you did that you aren't telling us about, because good people don't suffer like this. There's a formula, Job. There's a system, and you've broken it somehow. Job's sitting there in actual ashes, covered in sores, and his friends are essentially saying, well, have you considered that this is your fault? Theologians, gotta love them. Job pushes back, and he defends himself. He questions God. He demands an audience, a trial, someone to explain to him all of this. And wrong questions, all of them. Questions trying to fit God into a box, into human logic, into a system that makes sense. Chapters and chapters of this, back and forth, argument after argument. And then in the middle of all that pain, all that confusion, all those wrong questions, Job says something that doesn't quite fit. It doesn't fit with everything else that he's said up to this point. I know that my Redeemer lives, and that at the last he will stand upon the earth. Then in my flesh I shall see God. He doesn't have an answer to his questions. God hasn't explained anything yet. Nothing has been resolved, and he's still sitting in the ashes, still covered in sores, still surrounded by so-called friends. But somehow, this is where Job lands. I know that my Redeemer lives. Wrong questions. Right answer. Not a system, not a formula, not an explanation. God, my Redeemer, living. Now, you'd think humanity would have learned from Job's story. You'd think we'd figure out that trying to trap God in our logic just doesn't work, that the right answer is always God, not our clever answers. But we don't learn. We keep asking wrong questions. We keep trying to make God fit our systems. Fast forward several centuries, same pattern, different setting. This time it's Jesus at the temple. And he's been teaching, and it's been going well, maybe too well for the religious authorities. They've been trying to trip him up, catch him in a contradiction, expose him as a fraud. The Pharisees tried. That didn't work. Now it's the Sadducees' turn. And the Sadducees, they have a reputation. They're the rational ones, the ones who don't believe in the resurrection or angels or any of that supposedly superstitious nonsense. They deal in facts, in the law, in what can be seen and proven. Not so different from a lot of us, I suppose. Here's their scenario that they approach Jesus with. And they think it's an airtight case, a hypothetical situation designed to make the whole idea of resurrection look absolutely absurd. And there's this woman. She marries a man. He dies, no children. According to the law, his brother marries her to carry on the family line. But then that brother dies too, no children. So the next brother marries her, dies, no children. And the next dies, and the next dies. 7 brothers total, all married to the same woman, all dead. You can tell this isn't an idea from a woman. And then finally, the woman dies too. And then the Sadducees, they spring their trap. In the resurrection, whose wife will she be? Because all 7 were married to her. You can almost hear them smirking. Either you say that she's been married to all 7, which is absurd and probably illegal, or you admit that the resurrection makes no sense within the rules and structures of this world. Checkmate. Do not pass go. Do not collect $200. You lose. Good day, sir. It's a gotcha question. It's a trap designed to make Jesus look foolish. But here's the thing. They're asking the wrong question. They're trying to take the rules of this world, marriage and inheritance, family structure, all the systems that we've built to navigate a life where people die. And they're demanding Jesus apply those rules to resurrection life. They want resurrection to be just more of the same. This life but longer. Same rules, same structures, same logic. They're saying, make it make sense, Jesus. Fit God into our boxes, they say. And Jesus, he refuses. He doesn't answer their question the way that they've framed it. He won't play by their rules. Instead, Jesus plays the Uno reverse card and says something that probably confuses everyone standing there. He talks about those who belong to this age and those who belong to that age. He says something about marriage being for this age, but not that one. He says people in the resurrection cannot die anymore and are children of God being children of the resurrection. Jesus isn't playing games. And then he says this, God is not God of the dead, but of the living. For to him, all of them are alive. And that's it. That's his answer. Except that it's not really an answer to their question at all, is it? The Sadducees asked, whose wife will she be? And Jesus answered, God is God of the living. What does that even mean? How does that answer the question? It doesn't. At least not the question they asked. Because Jesus is doing something the Sadducees didn't expect. He's changing their question entirely. They want to know how the world's rules work in the next world. And Jesus says there's something fundamentally different about that age versus this age. They're trying to fit God's promises into human logic. Jesus is saying their logic is just too small. They're asking the wrong question. And honestly, we do that same thing all the time. Because we ask wrong questions too. Maybe not about whose wife someone will be in heaven. Our wrong questions sound different, but they come from the same place that the Sadducees' questions come from. Fear. Fear of death. Fear of loss. Fear of not having enough, not being enough, not controlling enough. And those fears shape our questions. How will I have enough? Enough money, enough time, enough security to protect myself and the people I love? How can I avoid loss? How do I make sure nothing bad happens? How do I keep everyone safe? How do I control outcomes? If I just work hard enough, play well enough, get it right enough, then maybe I can avoid the pain and the failure and certainly avoid death. How do I make myself invulnerable How can I work hard enough and plan well enough, get it right enough? How do I protect myself from being broken? These aren't silly questions. They're deeply human questions, and they come from real fear and real pain. But they're still the wrong questions, because they're all shaped by this fundamental assumption that death has the final word, that scarcity is the truth, and that we're on our own to figure out this. So listen to how it shapes our lives. Fear drives our perfectionism. If I can just get everything right, be a good enough parent, work hard enough at my job, make all the right decisions, then maybe I can avoid that disaster. Maybe I can earn safety. Maybe I can control my fate. Fear drives scarcity. There's not enough money, so I hoard. Not enough love, so I protect myself. Not enough time, so I panic and try and stuff it all in there. Better grab that while I can, because who knows what tomorrow will bring. Fear drives our invulnerability. Don't get too close. People leave. People die. People hurt you. Don't risk too much. You might fail. Don't open your heart fully. It might get broken. Better to stay safe. Better stay in control. And here's the thing, like the Sadducees, we're asking how questions shaped by this age. We're trying to fit God's promises, that abundant life, resurrection, hope, the God of the living. We're trying to shape all of that into our fear-shaped logic. We're crying out, make it make sense, Jesus. Tell us how to be safe. Give us the formula. I need A plus B equals C. Help me control this, Jesus. But what if those are the wrong questions? What if, like the Sadducees, our questions are just too small? Our imagination too limited. Our logic is shaped by this age when Jesus is trying to show us something about that age. What if the real problem isn't that we don't have good enough answers, but that we're asking the wrong questions in the first place? Here's the good news, and it is better than you think. Even when we ask the wrong questions, the answer is still God. Remember Job sitting in the ashes asking every wrong question he could think of. Why me? What did I do? Where is justice? And his friends piled on with their own wrong questions. What sin caused this? How do you fix it? Chapters and chapters of wrong questions, and nobody gets it right. Nobody cracks the code, and nobody figures out the formula. Yet somehow, from the ash heap, Job lands on the right answer. I know that my Redeemer lives. Not because he figured it out. Not because he asked the right questions, but because even in his wrong questions, those wrong questions led him back to God. The Sadducees asked their gotcha question. Whose wife will she be? And Jesus doesn't give them what they want. He doesn't engage with their logic. He doesn't play by their rules. But he does give them the right answer. God is not God of the dead, but of the living. For to him, all of them are alive. You want to know about marriage logistics in heaven? Wrong question. The right answer is God, the God of the living. See the pattern? Wrong questions, right answer, God. This is grace. We don't have to get our questions right. We don't have to have it all figured out. We don't have to have perfect theology or perfect understanding, like that's even possible. because the answer isn't a system we master or a formula we crack. The answer is God, the God who holds all life, the God who is God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, not was but is, the God for whom all are alive. Jesus is saying resurrection isn't about taking this life and extending it forever with the same rules and the fears and the same limitations. Resurrection is about transformed life. Jesus talks about this age and that age, and they're fundamentally different. Marriage in this age is partly about survival, and continuing the family line, protecting the vulnerable, navigating mortality. But in that age, in resurrection life, they cannot die anymore. That changes everything. When death is no longer the dominant reality, when we are children of God, being children of the resurrection, the whole framework just shifts. And the rules that we built to navigate a world dominated by death, they don't apply anymore. Not because they're bad rules, but because they belong to this age, and resurrection belongs to that age. This is what the Sadducees couldn't imagine, what we struggle to imagine too. What would it be to live without the threat of death? Not just without dying someday, but without death as a force that shapes everything. We can barely conceive of it. And that's what Jesus is pointing to when he says, God is not God of the dead, but of the living. When you know the answer is God, generosity becomes possible, not because you figured out your budget perfectly, but because scarcity loses its grip. You might find yourself giving in ways that you couldn't imagine before, not as a discipline, but as freedom. When you're a child of the resurrection, you can risk love without calculating the loss. The conversation that you've been avoiding, the reconciliation that feels too vulnerable, death doesn't have the final word either. So neither does fear of getting hurt. The relentless pressure to get everything right, to be invulnerable, to never fail, it starts to recede. You can try things, you can rest, you can be human. Here's what it might look like. You're lying awake at 2 a.m., anxiety whispers, all those questions pop up into your mind, and you take a breath and remember, the answer is God. In that moment, you're free. The fear still comes, but it doesn't run the show anymore. So I have a simple invitation for you this week. Notice. Notice where fear has been asking the questions in your life. And when you notice it, remember that the answer is God. That's it. Just notice and remember. Easier said than done. I give myself until about Tuesday before I forget, and I'm back to asking all the wrong questions on Wednesday morning at 2 a.m. We can't fully imagine what it's like to live without the threat of death. But we can practice noticing. We can begin remembering. We can receive those glimpses of resurrection life in worship and in prayer and in the body of Christ gathered. We're going to keep asking the wrong questions. That's what it means to be human. But here's what Jesus wants us to know. Even when you ask the wrong questions, the answer is still God. Not your effort, not your control, and certainly not your perfection. God, the God of the living. And children of the resurrection can live differently. Not perfectly, not fearlessly, but no longer ruled by fear. We don't have to hoard. There is enough. We don't have to be invulnerable. We are held. We don't have to get everything right. The answer is simply God. So live. Really, truly live. Live as who you already are. A child of the resurrection, fully alive, held in the hands of the God of the living. Because the answer to every fear, every anxiety, every wrong question we could ever ask, the answer is God. Amen.